In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, amen. Welcome to Crime and Punishment, the 85th episode of Crime and Punishment. This is a legal podcast. I used to say it's not a political podcast, but as you can tell by the title, we're talking about politics today. The title of today's episode is Political Depravity in the Law. It's been a few months. Good evening, everybody. Tonight I am toasting the blood gods. I don't know what that means, Olaf, but God bless, buddy. What have I missed? Evening all. Padfa, we just went live like 5 seconds ago. You missed absolutely nothing. And I've been gone for like 2 or 3 months. This is the first time we're doing this year. First time we're doing it in a long time. Anyway, the rest of the spiel podcast, the Invictus Law Firm, PA, a criminal defense law firm in Orlando, Florida. The website for which is AugustusInvictus.com. And that is me, yours truly, the host of this program. There's a bunch of links in the description. Honestly, I don't even know if they work anymore. Twitch, DLive, of course, Twitter. I don't know. If you're listening to this on YouTube, just go to Twitter. It's at Emperor Invictus. I have nuked Facebook. I have nuked Gab. Those no longer even exist. So the only place we're simulcasting now is YouTube and Twitter, or X, rather. I think those are all the announcements. My partner is here looking at me like I'm forgetting something. Well, so as I said, the title of today's episode is Political Depravity in the Law. And that is a nod to a book called The Political Depravity of the Founding Fathers. Tony Robbins has been on a media tour lately, you might have noticed. If you don't know, Tony Robbins has been on a media tour. You should probably pay attention to Tony Robbins. But one of the things he's been saying lately is, oh, well, people are so negative about politics. They're so negative about, well, look how they're treating each other. Look at the things that Trump is saying about these people. Look at the things that they're saying about Trump. And everybody's so negative. It didn't used to be this way. Our founding fathers, this and that. But that's not true. And Tony Robbins is pointing out, if you look at what the founding fathers were doing when they were campaigning, mudslinging would be a charitable word. They're calling each other things that if I said them on this program, we'd be axed from YouTube immediately. Probably be axed from X. I mean, it was vulgar. The founding fathers were absolutely not paragons of virtue. What we think of modern civility in politics, that's just not them. So this book, Political Depravity of the Founding Fathers, is making the point, it's always been this way, if not worse. America has always been corrupt in politics. And I don't know, I suppose that should be a comforting thing. But, I woke up this morning I get these things in my phone. Of course, you're getting advertised to all the time. So Google gives me these things. I don't even know how Google got on this phone. Let's see the article that it sent me today. Georgia House votes to revive prosecutor oversight panel as Democrats warn of targeting Fani Willis. It's a very loaded title. But the key phrase here is targeting Fani Willis. Amazing. So a little bit of the background story. Trump is being prosecuted in Georgia for trying to overturn the presidential election of 2020. It's this whole political scandal. Everybody knows it's a politically motivated prosecution. Well, one of the other people charged in this farce, his lawyers pointed out, hold on a second. This woman, Fani Willis, the prosecutor, appointed a special prosecutor. Didn't have the power to do that, apparently. I'm not a Georgia lawyer, so I don't know. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe they're right. But she appointed this special prosecutor and is sleeping with him. And not only that, they're using public funds to go fly around on luxury trips. Out of control. Absolutely unbelievable. So they actually get an investigation going. There has been an investigation into this woman and this special prosecutor prosecuting Trump, looking into this relationship, looking into the corruption there and how they've been using public funds From his appointment, by the way, by her to prosecute Trump. They're using those funds, allegedly, to go around on these luxury vacations. So there's an investigation opened into them because of this amazing corruption. Like, not even hiding it. I mean, when she went out and she defended the guy, she's like, so a black man can't be a prosecutor in a place of, public prominence without a tax like this? This is disgusting. She's not denying that it's true. I mean, amazing. So they open this investigation, and what do Democrats do? They say Trump is targeting this poor woman. Can you believe this? He is overturning the entire legal system because he doesn't want to be prosecuted for the horrible things he's done. Kind of like the same 1984 backwards narrative of, can you believe they tried to file legal cases to investigate and overturn the elections results that were obviously corrupted? So you think of, they're trying to revive this prosecutor oversight panel saying that Fani Willis is being targeted by Trump. Amazing. Amazing. You think of going back further, this woman is having an affair and using public funds to jet around the country with the prosecutor she appointed to prosecute Trump. Amazing. Going back even further, you think of this woman is prosecuting Trump for this and everybody around him. And not only his political toadies. We're talking about the lawyers who tried to file cases, who tried to work with the legal system to challenge the obvious corruption in the election of 2020. I'll get banned from YouTube for that statement. We're talking about, let's take a sidestep over to California. You're talking about Eastman, who was in disbarment proceedings because he dared to write a memorandum saying that Mike Pence could do this and that. A lawyer giving a legal opinion in a legal memorandum concerning the President of the United States. They sought to disbar him. I don't remember I never paid attention to the outcome of that. I don't know if he was disbarred or not, but the fact that he even got there is insane. I was in law school in Chicago when John Yoo came to town. Federalist Society invited him to Chicago at the Union Club, and I went. John Yoo is the one who wrote the torture memo, the infamous torture memo for the Bush administration. And went to this luncheon with him and the Federalist Society. And they waited till John Yoo came out and started talking. And of course, this liberal jumped up, started screaming about, how could you do this? And you're a war criminal and all the rest. And they escorted her out of the Union Club. But even that guy, they never sought to disbar him when G.W. Bush came out of power. They never went after the lawyers and said, you can't make these crazy claims. Even after we know what happened at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, and we know all the things that have happened because of the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, everything that's happened the past 2 decades, no one's ever said, we should go after the lawyers because they authorized all this stuff, or they gave unpopular legal opinions that the Bush administration and the Obama administration relied upon. We never go after the lawyers for targeted killings in Yemen. Like, that doesn't even cross anybody's mind that a lawyer giving a legal opinion in a crisis situation is going to be disbarred for doing so. Just an amazing situation. But it is the natural outcome when you consider going back even further. Just take a dart and throw a dart at the board of all these legal cases we've seen in the last 5 years or so. Rittenhouse. Think of a prosecutor like the guy prosecuting Rittenhouse. Obvious self-defense. This guy puts this poor kid on trial for murder. And if you didn't think that was retarded, this same idiot prosecutor takes a rifle and points it at the jury during closing arguments. That is how out of control prosecutors are in this country right now. And then you look at Charlottesville, where we are all on trial. All of us who were at Charlottesville on August 11th, 2017. And you look at the fact that these people who were quote-unquote counter-demonstrators, the Antifa themselves, take over the prosecutor's office to prosecute their political enemies with whom they disagreed that night. It's a live question right now. The prosecutor's office is being disqualified from one of the cases. Everybody else has to go through the same hearing. It's a thing about Virginia law. It's a very long story. They filed a motion to reconsider. That is the prosecution. There's a hearing for that coming up February 12th, so I can't really talk about it. But what an amazing situation that the leftists can take over the state machinery to prosecute their political enemies, do it balls out in broad daylight, and actually think it's not only legal but justified morally. We've got a case here in Orlando. Again, a live case. Nazis waving flags. You might remember this in the news. These Nazis waving swastika flags, but they're also waving DeSantis 2024 flags outside of Disney. So these guys are arrested for flag waving under this new law that DeSantis went to Israel to sign, this law combating anti-Semitism. DeSantis signs this law in April. He's allowed by the powers that be to run for president in May. He takes out our prosecutor, Monique Worrell, the head prosecutor in Orlando, takes her out, puts in his guy, Andrew Bain, in August. They then come down with the hammer on this new anti-Semitism law in September. Just so happens that the guy they brought it down on and made a media circus about it happened to be my client. What are the odds? So that's going on right now. Prosecutors are out of control all over America. All over America. It's absolute political depravity. But good news is, as John Bach McMaster has pointed out in The Political Depravity of the Founding Fathers, this has always been the case. So you think of all the horrible things that Biden says about Trump. You think of all the horrible memes that Trump is putting out about Biden, like the White House is an elderly care center, like a retirement home. And you could think, well, where's the civility gone? Americans would never treat each other like that. Yes, they would. Are you kidding me? So just go back in time with me today. We're going to read from this book. Think also about the trial of Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr is one of the most fascinating characters in American history. Absolutely at odds with the quote-unquote founding fathers, which itself is this myth created by the Jeffersonians, right? Aaron Burr was straight up targeted by Jefferson, hated Jefferson, vice versa. I mean, Jefferson hated Burr. So did Alexander Hamilton. I had this American history teacher, U.S. history. Also taught my African American history class, which I took in high school. One of the best teachers I've ever had. Loved the guy. Told me so many stories. Told us so many stories. And they were just unforgettable. And one of these was about the duel between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. So there was a duel. I forget who challenged who. I want to say it was Hamilton who challenged Burr because Hamilton was such a scumbag. Like, he's revered now as this founding father and the aide-de-camp of Washington and first treasurer and all. It was absolute scumbag. Challenges Burr to a duel. I'm pretty sure that was the way it went. They're going to duel with pistols. So Hamilton is charged with producing the pistols. So this scumbag puts a hair trigger on his own pistol and gives Burr a regular pistol. They go to do the deed. They draw, and Hamilton accidentally presses the hair trigger, and his shot fires. So Burr took all the time in the world, lined up his shot, and blew Hamilton away. One of the greatest stories in American history, if you ask me. The Burr had this amazing thing called the Knights of the Golden Circle. He was trying to create this empire, like invade Mexico, have this circle that included the Caribbean. Like, just what an amazing guy. Like an Alcibiades in America. The Jeffersonians hated him. Put him on trial for treason, which he won. By the way, the guy just unstoppable, right? Like Trump, just you can't stop the guy. Won the treason trial. If you go to Washington, D.C. today, and you go to Jefferson's library at the Library of Congress, you will see just the most ominous but interesting title on his bookshelves, and that is The Trial of Aaron Burr. Jefferson hated this guy. So this is like everybody's up in arms about Biden's prosecuting Trump and all these Democrats are after Trump and this has never happened before in American history. Yes, it has happened. As a matter of fact, that's how our entire country was set up. Our entire country was created by Freemasons who were traitors against the crown. Think about that. America is not some sacrosanct place. America was created by traitors who revolted against the crown because they were upset with taxes. These people were liberals. They were leftist revolutionaries. Multiple of them were involved in the French Revolution, which was a nightmare, as you might recall. The only justification for which was giving us Napoleon. So to think that the founding fathers were these upright moral paragons and that we should go back to this golden age of America, it is all a myth. This is America. This is how it's always been. We're just going back to roots now, I guess. So, the political depravity of the fathers. In times like the present, this book I believe was written in 1964. In times like the present, when the boss is everywhere, and when the high places of many state and municipal governments are filled by men who have secured them by methods greatly to be condemned, it may afford the honest citizen some consolation to know that these evils have always existed. Whoever reads the magazines and newspapers, whoever listens to the oratory of the pulpit and the after-dinner speeches of political reformers is well aware of the existence of a widespread belief that politicians and legislators and public men are more corrupt today than they were in the time of our ancestors 3 generations ago. Again, this is 1964. And that the cause of our political debasement is a free and unrestricted bout. Wait, 3 generations. Hold on, we're going to check this again. This might have been reprinted in 1964. Originally with the father. Oh, okay. So this particular chapter actually was written in 1896. Interesting. So post-Civil War. In any event, this most happily is a pure delusion. A very little study of long-forgotten politics will suffice to show that in filibustering and gerrymandering, and stealing governorships and legislatures, and using force at the polls, in colonizing and in distributing patronage to whom patronage is due, and all the frauds and tricks that go to make up the worst form of practical politics, the men who founded our state and national governments were always our equals and often our masters. Yet they lived in times when universal suffrage did not exist, and when the franchise was everywhere guarded by property and religious qualifications of the strictest kind. So he's going to go into all these qualifications because a lot of times we blame all this on, well, they're letting all the you-know-whos vote. Well, of course, they took away the requirement of property. Well, of course, they're letting women vote. Well, of course, they're whatever they've extended. Of course, they dropped the voting age from 21 to 18. Like everywhere along the way, you're like, well, that's what's created this incivility and this corruption. Like, no, it's always been corrupt. Remember Tammany Hall, like waiting while Irishmen got off the boat saying, hey, vote for us, vote Democrat. It's how it's always been. It's like the union drafting people, quote unquote drafting, like kidnapping them off the street to fight in the Civil War. Like, this is how it's always been. So one of the things he had mentioned earlier about stealing governorships and legislatures. Maybe you've seen the Oliver Stone movie, Nixon, which I know he meant to be unflattering to Nixon, but just makes Nixon awesome. In the beginning of the movie, he loses the 1960 election to JFK, and there are a lot of parallels between Trump's presidency and Nixon's presidency. And one of the first is, he loses to JFK, and his advisors are like, look, man, you can't challenge this. You challenge this, your career is over. It's political suicide. Just wait another 4 years, maybe 8, and then you can run for president again, and this will all be forgotten. But the Democrats, they stole it fair and square, Dick. They stole it fair and square. And I'm sure that's what people around Trump advised him too. Another parallel being, the Democrats hated Nixon, and they drove him out of office, forced him to resign, tried to do the same to Trump, impeaching him, so on and so forth. When Nixon left office, not many people understand this, but they didn't just let it go. They went after him like dogs after they removed him from office. He was disbarred from the Supreme Court. Incredible. To treat even in those times, in the 60s, but that's kind of the point. It's always been like this. People are up in arms about, well, how can they treat a former president like this? How could they do this to Trump? They did all of this to Nixon. Did you guys forget that? From the beginning to the end of Nixon's presidential career, from 1960 when he's losing that election to 73 when he finally is kicked out of office, all that time, they did all these same things to Nixon that they have done to Trump. And they're just going to keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. This is just how it goes. So now we're going to talk about universal suffrage, and he's going to repudiate that whole notion. In New England, 90 years ago, a voter must have an annual income of £3 or a freehold estate worth £60. In New York, he must be possessed of an estate worth £20 York money or rent a house for which he has paid 40 shillings annually. In New Jersey, the qualification was real estate to the value of £50. In Maryland and South Carolina, 50 acres of land. And in Georgia, £10 of taxable property. But many a man who could vote was hopelessly debarred from ever holding office. No citizen could be governor in Massachusetts who did not own £1,000 of real estate, nor be a senator unless he had a freehold worth £300. In North Carolina, senators must own 300 acres of land, and a governor lands and tenements to the value of £1,000. Here, the qualification for a representative was £100 of real property. There, it was 100 acres of land. Elsewhere, it was 250 acres of land and open profession of the Protestant religion. People forget that part. Religious restrictions were almost universal. In New Hampshire, in New Jersey, in North Carolina, in South Carolina, and Georgia, the governors, the members of legislatures, and the chief officers of state must all be Protestants. In Massachusetts and Maryland, they must be Christians. In North Carolina and Pennsylvania, they must believe in the inspiration of the Old and New Testaments. In South Carolina, in a future state of rewards and punishments. And in Delaware, in the doctrine of the Trinity. From the standpoint of those who in our day disapprove of universal suffrage, I think that's all of us, at least in this program, in this chat room here, this ought to have been a time of great political purity. The voters were taxpayers, Christians, and owners of property. The office holders were men of substance, while the qualifications for holding office increased with the dignity of the place. Yet it was, in truth, a period of great political depravity. Indeed, it may well be doubted whether in all our annals there can be found a finer example of filibustering than that afforded by the Assembly of Pennsylvania in 1787. Now, this example that's about to be brought up is actually reminiscent of House of Cards, amazingly. And this might be where they got the idea. The legislature of that state, that is Pennsylvania, then consisted of one house, which met at Philadelphia, and at the session in the autumn of 1787 had resolved to adjourn sine die on the 29th of September. As the question of the day was the ratification of the federal Constitution just framed, a member of the Assembly, on the morning of the 28th, moved that a convention be called to consider the Constitution, and that a time be fixed for the choice of delegates. The enemies of the Constitution opposed the motion, and, in the midst of the debate which followed, the Assembly adjourned for dinner. Now remember, the opponents of the Constitution were not the monarchists, they were the anti-federalists, saying, no, we don't want no federal government around here, law dog. We got our sovereign states. Those were the opponents we're talking about. The opponents of the call were in the minority, but without the presence of at least 3 of them, there could be no quorum. For those of you not familiar with the Robert's Rules of Order, a quorum is when there are enough people to take a vote in your political body, whatever it is. All resolved, therefore, to stay away. And when the assembly met again at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the clerk called the roll, no quorum was present, which means there were not enough people there to take a vote. The sergeant-at-arms was thereupon sent to summon the absentees, but not one would obey, and the assembly was forced to adjourn till the following morning. One of the reasons given for objecting to a call for the convention was that Congress, to which the Constitution had been transmitted by the framers, had not submitted it to the states, and that to act before it was sent out by the Congress was indecent and disrespectful. Obviously a disingenuous argument. It so happened, however, that Congress, then in session at New York, had submitted the Constitution of these states and to the states, and that an express writing post haste brought the resolution to a member of the Assembly early on the morning of the 29th. That is the 29th of September. St. Michael's feast day, by the way. When the Assembly met on that morning, the factious members being still absent and no quorum present, the sergeant and the clerk were again sent to bid them attend, and were ordered to show the resolution of Congress in hope of removing their objections. So, these guys, the anti-federalists, they're like, nah, we're not going to the Constitution. Look, it'd be disrespectful. They haven't even sent us the Constitution. We're going to vote to act on it? That's crazy. So they get the Constitution and they go out there and they say, look, we've got it. And they're like, nah, we're not attending. But everyone the sergeant summoned replied, I will not attend. Meantime, a report of their conduct had been spread abroad, and the people, hearing that there was no quorum, went to the tavern, seized 2 of the absentees, dragged them to the State House, thrust them into the assembly chamber, and blocked the doors. This completed a quorum, and the convention was called. So you might remember that Frank Underwood, as vice president and head of the Senate, pulled this same stunt. The Republicans were refusing to appear for this controversial bill, and they knew that they had to pass the bill, but the Republicans were like, look, we're going to be slaughtered by our constituents. We can't support this bill. We can't make a quorum. We got to do this. So Frank knew the law, and he sent a sergeant-at-arms to arrest these guys and to drag them into the chambers so that they could do the vote, right? So same deal here. These guys are like, nah, we're not going to vote on this. We don't want anything to do with the Constitution. So they sent the sergeant-at-arms to arrest them and drag them back to the assembly chamber and block the doors so they couldn't leave. So then they called the convention. But it must not be supposed that all that was good was confined to one party, and that all was bad to the other. In other words, the constitutionalists were just as bad, and he's about to tell it to you. The convention then called met in the State House late in November 1787 and took the Constitution into consideration. As the members would not bear the expense of employing an official stenographer, the labor of reporting the debate from day to day was undertaken by 2 young men. One, Alexander James Dallas, attended in behalf of the Pennsylvania Herald. The other, Thomas Lloyd, announced that he would take down the proceedings, quote, accurately in shorthand, end quote, and when the convention had adjourned, would publish them in one small octavo volume. But the debate had not gone on very long before the reports of Dallas and the Herald attracted attention, were copied far and wide, and furnished such material for opposition in states yet to consider the Constitution that the Federalists became alarmed and suppressed them. To do this, it was necessary to buy the Pennsylvania Herald, which was done, and the report of the debate stops abruptly with November 30th. This convention sat till December 15th, but not another word of its proceedings nor a line of explanation appears in the Herald. And then it's going to talk about the next part, but think about that. Think about that in modern times. I forget who it was, but someone said to Napoleon, "Wow, it's amazing. All the newspapers love you." And he said, "Yeah, you wouldn't imagine what I had to go through to shut down all the newspapers that didn't love me." So that's what these people have done. The Federalists were like, whoa, we didn't mean for all this information to get out. We didn't want people knowing what we were debating and what we were hashing out here in the Constitutional Convention. We can't let people know this. People are opposed to it. So they stopped this guy from publishing it. They bought the freaking newspaper itself. The Federalists bought the Herald and shut it down so that people would stop reporting on it and no one would oppose them anymore. Dead, total silence for the following month until it was done. So, next part. It was necessary in the next place to dispose of Mr. Lloyd, who, though he had published nothing as yet, had promised to do so and had secured subscriptions. But he too succumbed, and when, to satisfy his subscribers, he issued his book, in place of the debate accurately taken in shorthand, as he had promised, there appeared but two speeches, one by Thomas McKean and one by James Wilson, both ardent supporters of the Constitution. As a consequence, there does not exist today anything more than a fragment of the proceedings of the Pennsylvania Convention which ratified the Constitution. So think about that. Total media blackout on the most important debate in this country's history. The debate of whether to ratify the Constitution, the debate on what's going to be in there. Total media blackout. They bought out the newspaper to shut it down. And then they had the remaining guy who was taking notes in shorthand publish only two speeches, both of which were in support of the Constitution. Like, imagine that happening today. Like, the Democrats shut down all media. And then when you heard about what was going on in the Capitol, they only published their own pro-Democrat or pro-whatever issue speeches, right? Kind of like you have a January 6th committee, right? And they just delete a fourth of the files that they used to compile this quote-unquote report, this propaganda piece that they issued. Like, imagine that happening today, how mad people would get. And yet those same people who are mad about the J6 committee are saying, oh, we should go back to the way the Founding Fathers did it. That actually is how the Founding Fathers did it. That's America, baby. When 10 other states had followed the example of Pennsylvania, the Continental Congress, sitting at New York, selected the first Wednesday in January 1789 as the day when the electors of president should be chosen in the 11 ratifying states. In most instances, the business of choosing them was easy and rapidly transacted. But the legislature of New York was the scene of a bitter contest. The Assembly had passed a bill defining the manner of electing senators and presidential electors, according to which each house was to nominate 2 men to be United States senators, and then the houses were to meet in joint session and compare lists. If there was either complete or partial disagreement, a joint ballot was to be held on the names of the unsuccessful candidates. Now, in the Assembly, the Anti-Federalists had a great majority, while in the Senate, the Federalists had a small majority. Had the bill passed the Senate and become a law, the nominees of each house would have been different. A joint session would have been necessary, and at that joint session, the Anti-Federalists of the Assembly, greatly outnumbering the Federalists of the Senate, would have elected both senators. For this reason, the Senate disliked the bill, and so amended it that, in case the nominees of the House were not those of the Senate, the House should choose one from the 2 offered by the Senate, and the Senate one from the 2 proposed by the House. To this, the House refused to agree, and a conference followed. But as neither would yield, New York had no senators during the first session of the first Congress. So, again, people get all up in arms when Republicans will game the system. And, right now they're mad at Mike Johnson for, what are they mad at him about? because he won't negotiate on the bill that he was promoting during Trump's presidency about immigration, and he won't fund, giving military powers to Biden to secure the border, so on and so or funding to secure the border, rather. Like, okay, well, that's how politics works. Like, you don't like what the other side is doing, so you cut off everything you can. Like, you use every tool available to stop them and to crush your enemy. Like, that's how politics works. The problem here that we see today is they're using the legal system to do that. They're not using political tools to do that. Like, we're talking about Congress cutting off funding for something they don't support the president doing. That is an explicit power of Congress. That's why we have the separation of powers. That's how the system's set up. The system is not set up so that political activists can use the legal system to criminally prosecute the people they don't like politically. That is not how it was set up. As a matter of fact, we did everything we could for like 1,000 years to stop that from happening. Anglo-American law is predicated upon that the law is a sacred thing. All law, since before the time of the Roman Empire, all law has been considered a sacred obligation. You can't just use it to prosecute your political enemies. I mean, obviously it has been used that way, but the way we've seen it used now, where it's just routine for Democrats to prosecute Republicans, and it's routine for liberals to prosecute conservatives, it's routine now. Well, it's going to be. We only have one case of this, but for the Antifa to take over a prosecutor's office and prosecute the far right, that's a trend none of us wanted to see in this lifetime. But let's look at the chat. It's been a while. I've been talking nonstop for 40 minutes. So, Patriarchy Sound, good seeing you again. Well, back at you. Patriarchy Sound. What was your screen name before, buddy? Freedom Falcon. I remember that screen name. What's up, buddy? Kitty, good evening. Long time no see. Hail to John Gordon Meade. Good to see you, buddy. GG, great to hear from you too. Padfa, what's that saying about never meet your heroes or historical figures, it seems? Yeah, if you're a Jefferson guy, you might not want to read this book. Or really anything on Jefferson. Or Hamilton. Or any of them, really. Yeah, we have this, we're inculcated with this when we're in elementary school. And middle school and high school. Well, maybe not so much high school anymore. But all of us, we were raised in the Cold War, like the founding fathers are basically saints in our civil religion. You can't question what they did. What they did was holy and just and necessary, revolting against the evil crown and the evil redcoats who were, suffocating America with their tyranny. Like, that whole narrative is just absolute garbage. Now, when they remove a bust of Thomas Jefferson, okay, that's a different story. Like, you can look at history and be like, all right, these guys were not saints. But you don't look at history and say, well, screw these guys. They were all white supremacists and horrible people, and we should take them out and put in George Floyd. Like, now you're just a Marxist. Now you're just a lunatic. That's a different story. But you can look back and say, no, these guys were not saints. Aaron Burr was the man. And you understand that great men have differences. And they go to war. Like, you can look back now as a Southerner or as a Yankee and say, they were great men on both sides of that conflict. I don't hold it against, the descendants of the Yankees that their forefathers came down here. I mean, well, maybe not Florida. We won every battle in the Civil War, I'll have you know. But the other southern states, they came down and they did this and that. Like, I'm not holding it against the Yankees. Come on. Like, that was a long time ago. Had nothing to do with us. Like, things happen. And sides disagree and horrible things happen. Like, you're reading the Iliad and you're like, no, I choose the Trojans because those evil Greeks came to their shores. Like, shut up, bro. There's no moral high horse to sit on when you're reading the Iliad. Shut up. I can't believe the Greeks used that wooden horse. How dare they? Like, dude, you're barking up the wrong tree, right? So I'm not going to, like, sit on this high horse and look back at Jefferson and be like, can you believe that guy writing the summary of rights of British Americans and revolting against the crown? Like, yeah, he was wrong, but these were also great men. Like, and it's our history. You don't just take those out of courthouses and be like, no, these were white supremacists, forget these guys. Or even from our perspective, like, no, these guys were Freemasons and liberals and we should get rid of them. Like, dude, you can't do that. We're not on the same page there. However, yeah, don't meet your heroes or your historical figures. Jordan Gordon Mead, freedom means you are free to do what the law allows, and we control the laws. That's very 1984, yeah. It's like that when Rage Against the Machine is quoting that. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Like, yeah, you can be free acting within these parameters of the law, but we now control the laws. We've taken it all over. The hand that rocks the cradle. Always enjoy your coverage, Augustus, says LP. Thank you, buddy. What are your thoughts on Charles A. Beard and his economic interpretation of the Constitution? I can't give you an answer to that right now, to be honest. I do have it upstairs in the library, so maybe ask me next time, buddy. He says, in my opinion, Grant was mostly a respectable general until he ran for president. Yeah, I actually, a couple months ago, obviously I'm always on trial in Virginia, but I had to go up there for one of the hearings in this case, and on the way back down, just ran into Appomattox. It's not like I put it in the map or anything, I just ran into it. I'm like, oh my God. So I went to the place, went to where they signed the surrender, all that stuff, and seeing Grant there on that massive painting, that was actually pretty neat. And yeah, as a Southerner, like, I've never especially liked Grant, but you know, being there and knowing both sides of the story, like, I'm not going to say, well, when the South rises again, we need to remove Grant from Appomattox and never let him, see this place again. Like, that's just insane. That's insane. So anyway. So in New York, this is what they did between the House and the Senate. So, by another section of the same bill, provision was made for the choice of presidential electors in a manner similar to that for the election of senators. Each house was to prepare a list of 8 names. A joint session was to follow. The lists were to be compared, and men whose names were on both were to be declared elected. If the two lists were utterly different, and they were absolutely certain to be so, 8 of the 16 nominees were to be chosen by joint ballot, in which event the 8 proposed by the Assembly would have been elected. The Senate, of course, refused to hear of such a plan, and as the Assembly would not yield, no electors were chosen, and New York cast no vote for president in 1789. How interesting. What a convoluted process to even propose. This stubborn contest between the two houses over the choice of electors and senators was followed 3 years later by the theft of the governorship. The candidates were John Jay for the Federalists and George Clinton for the Republicans. Each had been long in public life. Each had rendered many and distinguished services to the state. And as a consequence, the election was close. So close, indeed, that the loss of a few votes would decide it either way. In those days, when men were without the telegraph, the railroad, or the steamboat, and when the center of New York State was the frontier, the counting and canvassing of a state vote was a slow and tedious matter. The law required that as soon as the vote of a town was counted, the inspectors should send ballots to the sheriff of the county, who should then put them in a box, and when every town in the county had been heard from, should carry the box to Albany, as the capital of New York, and deliver it to the Secretary of State. As the votes in the eastern and southern counties were announced one by one, the majority for Clinton dwindled until it stood at 108, with 2 strong J counties to be heard from. If Clinton was not to be defeated, it was clear that an excuse must be found for throwing out the returns of some Federalist county, and Happy for the Republicans, an opportunity to do so existed. The box from Tioga County, which contained a good majority for Jay, had been given by the sheriff to his deputy to carry to Albany. But the deputy fell sick, by the way, and sent the box on by a sub-deputy of his own appointment. This, the Clintonians decided, was illegal, and insisted that the vote of Tioga should not be counted. But even with Tioga left out, Jay would have a majority if Otsego was counted. Now, in Otsego, the sheriff had been appointed in February 1791 to serve 1 year, and just before the close of his first term had written to the Council of Appointment declining a second term. 1 month after the end of his year, a successor was appointed, but had not qualified nor acted when the election took place. In this state of things, the old sheriff continued to act, and, gathering up the ballots cast in the towns of his county, sent them by his deputy to Albany. Scarcely had he done this when he found that the ballots of one town had been left out, and these he sent wrapped up in paper. The Clintonians, availing themselves of these irregularities, insisted that the returns of Otsego should not be counted. There was, in the first place, no sheriff. In the second place, the law required that the vote of every town should go in the box. But as one had not gone into it, all the others must be lost. To this, the Federalists made an elaborate answer and supported their reasoning by the published opinion of 8 of the most distinguished lawyers then practicing in New York City. You'll notice they didn't try to disbar those lawyers. The votes, after being received by the Secretary of State, were to be canvassed by a joint committee of 6 members of the Senate and 6 members of the Assembly. As some were Federalists and some Republicans, they very naturally differed as to receiving and canvassing the votes of Otsego and Tioga, and after many stormy sessions, agreed to refer the whole matter to a commission consisting of the United States Senators from New York, Rufus King and Aaron Burr. Colonel Burr, knowing that the Clintonians had a majority of the canvassing board, proposed to give no opinion. But when King declared that he should advise the canvassers to count the votes of Tioga and Otsego, Burr immediately advised them not to do so. Thus left to themselves, the majority rejected the returns from the 2 counties as irregular and declared Clinton governor. A storm of indignation swept over the state. The Federalists, in their fury, held public meetings, denounced the governor as a usurper, declared the board of canvassers was corrupt, and described the policy of the Republicans as Machiavellian. But when the next election gave them the House and Senate, they showed very quickly that they too could be Machiavellian when it was expedient. By the Constitution of New York, as it then was, every office not expressly elective was filled by appointments made by a board of 5 men, known as the Council of Appointment. These 5 men were the governor and 4 senators chosen by the Assembly, one from each group of 6 senators from the 4 senatorial districts into which New York was divided. As the elective offices were confined to the governor, the lieutenant governor, state treasurer, members of the legislature, and congressmen, the list of appointments was a long one, and included the Secretary of State, the Comptroller, the judges, the Attorney General, the clerks of the courts, the sheriffs of the counties, the coroners, the mayors of the cities, the county court judges, and the justices of the peace. In making these appointments, the governor had merely the casting vote, but, as the law said, he must, quote, with the advice and consent of the said council, appoint all the said officers, end quote. The governor had always held that he alone could nominate. While the governor and the council were of the same political stripe, this claim was freely allowed. But in 1794, the revolt against Clinton made the council a Federalist body, which naturally declined to put into office Republicans named by the governor, and for the first time in its history, the members asserted an equal right to nominate. Clinton protested, and the matter was dropped to come up again during the administration of John Jay. In 1795, while Mr. Jay was in London, where he had just concluded the treaty that still bears his name, he was triumphantly elected governor, without his consent and almost without his knowledge, and was re-elected in 1798. But the Federalist success of this latter year was followed by the sweeping Democratic victory of 1800, and in 1801 Jay found himself in a condition similar to that of Clinton in 1794. A majority of his council of appointment were Democratic. This was no trifling matter, for in February 1801, the civil commissions of the office holders in 11 counties and the mayors of 4 cities expired, and it may well be believed that the workers in the victorious party became clamorous for their rewards. The Assembly having elected the council, The governor convened it in February to fill the vacancies and, according to custom, asserted his sole right to nominate. But at the board sat DeWitt Clinton, and, led on by him, the Republicans rejected in rapid succession 11 of the governor's nominations, refused to vote on several more, and they began to make nominations of their own. This was too much for Jay, who adjourned the council, and, as it could not meet unless summoned by him, the places went unfilled. Jay then appealed to the legislature, which called a convention that amended the Constitution and gave to each member a right to nominate. Thus was the spoils system introduced into New York. And from that day, a change in the political complexion of the Council of Appointment was sure to be followed by a proscription of office holders. So, what a fascinating story. Like, they've got this election, and there's these two counties, and their votes are, like, in question. And these counties are going to give the election to John Jay. And Clinton is like, nope, can't have that. Let's figure out how we're going to stop that. And says, hey, you don't actually have a sheriff in this town. Sorry, your transport of those votes to Albany is illegal. Can't count them. Sorry, buddy. And the other one, they gave it to a sheriff who then gave it to a sub-deputy, and they're like, nah, that's not part of the rules, buddy. Sorry, can't tally your votes either. And Clinton won the election. Man, that sounds so familiar. And this guy is calling it a theft of an election. He'd be banned from YouTube for that, I think. So then they point out that, well, eventually these guys took over, and Jay was elected governor twice. When they found out like they could play just as dirty, and they got Jay in there, and then it turns out the Democrats won, and they got him out. So it goes back and forth like that. People steal elections, and then they kick the people out using all the political tools at their disposal, and then they get the new guys in there that do it to them, and that's just how this system works. That's what happens when you make up an entire political system out of whole cloth, and you reject the system that you've had for, 1,000 years? So, here we are. Oh, we got 5 minutes left. I guess that's going to be the end of our story. But how interesting that Aaron Burr was one of the people who agreed that, you know what, we're going to steal this election for Clinton. How about that? So LP says the end of the war was federal paper and Confederate ink, whose Southerners provided because Grant was out of it. The actual story is quite interesting and not what our younger generation would think. Oh, it was made on federal paper. Yeah, that is interesting. It's a very congenial scene. Like, if you've never been to Appomattox, like, you go to that house and, like, you know the story of them riding in on horses and walking into the house, and, like, you see where they signed. Like, it's actually a really interesting scene to see. Anyway, all that being said, the political system in America is just this way. I can't say that's how it was designed to be, but that's just how it always has been. So here we are, playing it out. Doom Paul says, fascinating story. Thanks for reminding us, Augustus. Weird coincidences indeed. You know what? I'm going to tell you another fascinating story by Mr. Davis, my American history teacher in high school, also my African American history teacher, where I watched all of Roots, by the way. He told me the story of Tecumseh and the curse of the Great White Father. What an interesting story. So Harrison, I guess, had defeated Tecumseh, and the great Indian chief with the epic war speech of, you know, stomping his foot, and like, I don't even want to butcher it. It's just so, I mean, Tecumseh was awesome. So he's dying, I think, up on this mountain, and his dying words are to curse the Great White Father, by which, of course, he means the President of the United States. And from that point forward, every 20 years, the president would die in office. And you got to think, like, do presidents know about this story? Well, of course they know about this story. And yet they just die and die and die, and JFK was assassinated. But then Ronald Reagan gets elected, and they know about it. Ronald Reagan's wife was just obsessed with this thing, obsessed with astrology, consulted astrologers, tried to find out how are we going to get Ronald away from this curse. And of course, he was shot, but he survived. And when I was in high school, we were about to have that 2000 election. And my history teacher's point was, we're about to find out if the curse of Tecumseh has actually been broken. Because this next president, if they die in office, then Reagan was a fluke. But if they don't, curse of Tecumseh is in fact broken. And as we all know, G.W. Bush won. He was not killed in office, and so it does appear that the curse of the Great White Father is over. That's your history lesson for tonight, everyone. Stay in school. Don't do drugs. See you next time.